The Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS, is a unit of the Nigerian Police, established in 1992 to combat armed robbery and violent crimes like kidnapping. As a child of necessity, SARS used unconventional and conventional methods to carry out its responsibility of ridding Nigeria of violent crimes. Over the years, the unit derailed and became notorious for wanton brutality, harassment, and human rights abuses. Before long, SARS came under fire for cases of extortion, harassment, intimidation, abuse of power, and outright murder. This brought about constant agitations by the citizens for the reform or outright scrapping of the unit. An online movement, the hashtag ENDSARS, began in 2018 to protest against brutality by the police unit. In October 2020, a footage of SARS officers in Lagos pulling two men out of a hotel to the street and shooting one of them went viral on social media. The footage provoked outrage and led many to share stories of brutality by a unit notorious for unduly profiling young people.
In regards to what we are memorializing, I think it's basically the incidents that happened at Lekki Tollgate. If we're talking about ENDSARS, ENDSARS started as far back as 2017. That was when the hashtag was launched. Of course, what happened in October 2020 was that the streets, the protests moved from social media to the streets.
The hashtag was resurrected, this time leading to mass protests with one goal: the disbandment of SARS. Demonstrations against SARS took place in different states across the country, such as Lagos, Enugu, Rivers, Oyo, Calabar, the FCT Abuja, and many more. Many eminent Nigerians, especially artists, joined the protests, condemning police brutality and calling for the scrapping of SARS.
A lot of issues accumulated in the advent of the ENDSARS protests of 2020, which later became violent. Among these issues were the police attitude to civilians, particularly the members of the disbanded Special Anti-Robbery Squad. But apart from that, people were not happy with the system. A lot of things were wrong, and certain basic economic activities were not there. People were not enjoying governance. It is only a few, the politicians and the political appointees.
Well, the ENDSARS thing, of course, is a combination of so many issues, social issues, having to do with the abuse of power or misuse of power by the security forces in the country, notably the police. And over the years, different organizations, apart from even complaints of Nigerians about security agencies, but over the years, different international non-governmental organizations have done detailed studies of the activities, the unwholesome activities of the security agencies in the country, especially with regards to violation of human rights. Amnesty International has done a lot of that. I also know that the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights has done a lot of work in that direction. And so this has gone on for quite some time. It is not as if the names they try to come up with some form of reform or the other, but obviously none of this worked until the constant harassment of Nigerians, especially the issue of this issue of stopping Nigerians on the streets with laptops, and those in cars, especially those who look young and maybe vulnerable, that the police feels they can actually do certain things to them and they get away with it. So this has continued unabatedly until, of course, the dam burst. So in the southwest of this country, when I think it was Ogun State or so, they had a run-in with the authorities. The very first time around, there were mass demonstrations, protests against the police brutality.
President Muhammadu Buhari summoned the then Inspector General of Police, Muhammad Adamu, directing him to scrap Sars and effect some reforms in the police. On Sunday, the 11th of October, the Inspector General of Police announced the dissolution of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS, across the 36 states of the country and the FCT with immediate effect. In his statement, the IG stated that all officers and men serving in SARS will be redeployed. But the ENDSARS protests raged on across the country, despite the scrapping of the unit. The protesters were against the reintegration of the same officers into other units of the police force.
On the 11th of October, when the police said that they had disbanded SARS and the IG of police brought out 5 things that it is, what it meant by this disbandment. What happened that same day? They brought out 5 for 5. What more kind of leadership do you want beyond that? On the 19th of October, they brought out implementation of the 5 for 5. They actually told, since the government wasn't showing leadership, they didn't know what to do beyond just saying that, oh, we've accepted it and sending in thugs and police to harass them. They gave the action the government needed to take, the action that needed to be taken immediately, the action that the short to mid-term actions that needed to be taken, and medium to long-term actions that needed to be taken.
Major roads were blocked, causing intense traffic as protesters marched to different strategic locations in cities like Lagos and Abuja. President Muhammadu Buhari spoke again on the matter, saying the scrapping of SARS is the first step in his commitment to substantive police reforms.
With regards to the welfare of police personnel, the National Salaries, Income and Wages Commission has been directed to expedite action on the finalization of the new salary structure of the members of the police force. The emoluments of other paramilitary services are also being reviewed upwards.
While the president was speaking, protesters were on the streets in different locations. The protests raged on across the country until the 20th of October. In Lagos State, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu declared a 24-hour curfew that was to take place from 4 p.m. that day. Many protesters dispersed from the streets they had occupied, but at the Lekki toll gate, protesters remained. The Lekki toll gate was one of the most vibrant protest locations in the country. Hundreds of people from all backgrounds showed up each day, and many stayed overnight. The curfew was later delayed to 9 p.m. after many people complained that it was impossible to get home before 4 p.m., given the traffic in Lagos. The events that followed have been controversial, with different tales of what occurred. The Nigerian army was accused of firing at unarmed protesters, killing some of them. Witnesses at the scene said that between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m., well before the 9 p.m. curfew, men dressed in military fatigues arrived in about 5 trucks and began firing in the air and at protesters. They claimed soldiers took many of the bodies away with them. But the federal government continues to deny these claims. Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, insists the claims are false.
The federal government remains proud of the security agencies for acting professionally and showing utmost restraint all through the ENDSARS protests and the ensuing violence, an action that saved lives and properties. 5. The 6 soldiers and the 7 policemen who died during the ENDSARS protests are human beings with families, even though the human rights organizations and CNN simply ignore their deaths, choosing instead to trumpet a phantom massacre.
The controversy seemed to be the harbinger of violent attacks in the country. The following day, various shops looted, buildings burnt, and many killed.
They've started attacking us inside the studio. I had to cut off the show, and we couldn't go up. We can't continue the show right now. I don't even know what to do.
TVC Communications was not left out of the debacle, with its head office in Lagos burned to the ground by persons unidentified. BRT buses were burnt at their terminals, the Palace of the Oba of Lagos looted and burnt, and many more public infrastructure like traffic lights destroyed. Police stations were invaded, with many weapons stolen. Governor of Lagos State, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, disclosed that Lagos will need up to 1 trillion naira to rebuild destroyed infrastructure.
The youths took matters into their hands to show their angst and then peacefully demonstrated in many parts of the country, well organized, and they were being praised at a particular point in time by not just by Nigerians but by international organizations and countries for acting in ways that showed their frustration with the system, but acting within the limits of within the confines of the law. They were quite law-abiding, and that was why they received all of these commendations. And then in the process, I think they embattled the government at the federal level, and virtually many states in the country, especially the South, began to infiltrate the ENDSARS movement. They began to sponsor thugs to cause problem and mayhem. And then in order to give it the whole exercise, which had been hitherto peaceful, to give it a completely, different coloration. And as they say, you give a dog a bad name in order to hang it. And that was what we saw when most of the people who took part in the counter demonstrations were government agents and thugs. We saw what played out in Abuja, where people in jeeps were directing acts of brigandage against the protesters. We also saw at the state levels to bring a reputable movement to disrepute. And that was what happened until we eventually saw the shootout at the Lekki toll gate, which a lot of people have described as a massacre. And of course, the government, we know that the government set up a panel of inquiry, and that is Lagos State government. And then since then, there have been all kinds of insinuations. So I would say that they were lacking, not in zeal, not in the sense of patriotism, but they seem to be lacking in experience. And that had to do again with the nature of organization of the ENDSARS team, which ultimately, at the initial stage, people felt was okay, it was a good thing. There was no central leadership. And I think that the essence of not having a central leadership was the fear of sabotage, was the fear of a sellout.
People were afraid to come out to coordinate the art protests. We had stars, Nigerian comedians and musical stars, the movie stars coming out to make it look like a jamboree. And then I must say that the lessons from that protest is gradually getting lost on us. You must have started hearing again police brutality. You've seen videos. I saw one where a policeman in Okene Aziz, was said to have brought down a passenger from a vehicle. I saw him slap the passenger unprovoked. And then the passenger was taken to ATM and he was forced to pay 25,000. Issues like this, how do we address it? But let us look at solutions to issues. We already know almost all the problems we have. having identified some problems, it's only proper that we provide solution. If the Nigerian police are posted out of the country for peacekeeping, you see them performing very well because they have all the wherewithal, they have all the welfare, they have encouragement and all. Here, monies are said to have been given for certain logistics, within the police. It doesn't go down. Go to the barracks where they live. They don't have the means to transport themselves. They don't have the arms to use. In the service, they don't get paid. Go around, policemen are, shortchanged when it comes to payment of pension and retirement benefits and gratuities. They are shortchanged. Who is talking about this? Nobody, because they can't come out to protest. But as a lawyer, and I also handle criminal matters, I see their limits, and that is not a crime to investigate. You see people respect them, and they go all out. They do good job because they have the wherewithal. But the police is the mother of all security, particularly when it comes to civil, investigation of civil offenses.
Judicial panels of inquiry were set up by state governments as a means to serve justice to victims. The Lagos State Judicial Panel of Inquiry and Restitution for Victims of SARS-related abuses was set up on October 19, 2020, to receive and evaluate public complaints of police brutality and extrajudicial killings, and to recommend compensation for victims and officers for prosecution.
If, for example, the duty of the security agencies is to provide protection for people to exercise their fundamental rights to freedom of expression, and not to ask people not to exercise that freedom. If the measure that was taken, if what happened at Lekki had not happened, if the security had not opened fire, the level of degeneration that we saw would not have happened. And when I said, going back to what regarding, the question I wanted to ask is, have those things really been addressed? Yes, ENDSARS panel has been sitting. Commendably, some of the victims have received monetary compensations. But how many perpetrators of these violations, these abuses have been brought to account? And how come that every day we continue to record the same abuses, the same violations, the same brutalities that have led to ENDSARS?
The essence of peace and justice. If there is no justice, you cannot have peace. If there is no peace, you cannot have development. And so obviously, the problem, that has afflicted this country over the years has been the issue of, of injustice, inequality, exclusion, in the country. And that has taken a toll on Nigerians. The division that we have in this country, the crisis of governance that we have, in this country, and the response of the Nigerian citizens generally, the insurgency that is going on in parts of the country, the separatist movement that we're also seeing in other parts of the country, are all a result of one essential element that is missing in statecraft, and that is the issue of injustice. And it is this injustice that led to the action of the youth, during the ENDSARS movement. The injustice that they have suffered at the hands of agents of the Nigerian state. So they were responding to these acts of injustice. And you will think, that the essence of even setting up a commission, the essence of the police saying that they are going to restructure the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which was primarily the body, responsible for the brutality, and the denial of the rights of the abuse of human rights of Nigerians. That is Special Anti-Robbery Squad. They said they are going to restructure it. It was as a result of the injustice that was being perpetrated by that institution against ordinary Nigerians. So on one hand, there's a recognition by the government that the protest by the Nigerian youth was legitimate and they needed to do something about that.
It's a protest for survival, and people have felt the brutality of police. The thing is that Nigerians want to make all sorts of theories and whatever. But you know what I always say to Nigerians? Yesterday's victims were once survivors. Today's victims were yesterday's survivors. Tomorrow's victims will be today's survivors. And let's also know that those who have been killed by SARS will not be killed again. They are already dead. The next to be killed are those of us who are alive. And the question I always ask is, who is next? Because the victim card is going around. It is looking for who to follow. And being a victim in Nigeria today is no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
You hear stories of them stopping, on the highway, stopping people who are wearing, young people who are wearing dreadlocks, and a number of youths that are even on the roads. So the same harassment that led to the ENDSARS movement has continued unabatedly in the country, all over the country. So it would appear that yes, there was a period of being laid back, in response to what had happened, because of course we saw that what happened actually shook the security agencies, especially the police, even beyond the police, the vehicle inspection officers, the VIOs, which that a lot of Nigerians also saw as being very oppressive. The LASMA, in Lagos here, the traffic officers of the Lagos State government, as well as the various task forces across the country, especially in Lagos State, so it was a response to some of these acts of aggression, and unlawfulness on their part. But unfortunately, this situation has continued because there are new reports about police, harassing innocent Nigerians, especially young people, who have done nothing wrong, but just matching them off to the ATM, sometimes at gunpoint, and literally emptying their bank account. So these are the situations that led to the ENDSARS, and it appear that we have learned nothing. Obviously, a lot of people believe that the government was not sincere when they said they are going to restructure SARS. That restructuring has not taken place, obviously.
So we must continue to emphasize the need for government to embrace basic principles of democracy, which is that people have the right to exercise their freedom of expression and without being molested, without being shot at, without being killed unnecessarily. So ENDSARS was a momentous, occasion in the history of in our political history, and we need to mark it to ask ourselves questions: what were the lessons? What were the opportunities that have missed? Remember that less than a month to ENDSARS, the president has signed the Police Act into law. So, question now is this an opportunity for us to sit back and say, how far have we achieved change?
The ENDSARS protest will be remembered for many reasons. It was a time when Nigerians came together to speak with one voice against police mistreatment and brutality.